enrollment, etc. So, and how that impacts our financial picture. So thank you for that, and again, appreciation on behalf of the board. So at this point, we have, I actually really like this report. It shouldn't even be, actually, I enjoy this report because this really is about the work that supports the strategic plan of the board. So again, I turn this over to Superintendent Ning.
Great, thank you, Chair Wilson. So happy to bring the Enhancing Student Learning Report for September 2025. What I would position the board is this fits within your strategic plan, specifically under the student success pillar. And there is a more fulsome report. You'll see about 70 pages that is included, part 1 and part 2, for you to review. But I had some pieces that I wanted to touch on specific to those reports to highlight for you as you look at the information. So it is a requirement through the Ministry of Education and Child Care that we provide this report by the end of this September. And so I want to acknowledge the significant amount of work that goes into this by our senior team. It starts with a collection of information in a number of areas related to foundation skills assessments, to the grad assessments, to the student learning survey, to our 5-year grad rates, etc. Then comes to analysis by our senior team. And specifically, I want to acknowledge Director Tracy Chris for her work and leadership with this, with the curriculum department, as it's no small undertaking to put this together. So, and I apologize, it looks small, because it is, and I just want to highlight some things for you, so I will go through quickly some of the slides, just identify some trends for you, and then there's some text later on that will reinforce. But with the framework for enhancing student learning, there are 3 areas: the intellectual, the personal social, and the careers piece. And we want to talk about the intellectual development and specifically literacy. And we heard again earlier today the importance of that and the priority of the board in its commitments to literacy. And so what you'll have up here is a measure of grade 4 literacy expectations based on the FSA assessment. And as a reminder, this slide represents the bar, represents the students that are on track or extending. So this is developing, proficient, extending. That's the group that they're capturing here in terms of the percentages. What I'll draw your attention to is just overall, you'll see the square dots represent the provincial, that they're, while we are experiencing, I'll say, a declining trend, that is a provincial trend, where we are seeing over a 5-year period of time a decline in the FSA results at grade 4. For us specifically, just a reminder, you'll see what appears to be a blip in the 21-22 year. Again, as a reminder, that was the flood year, and so our results are incomplete as some of the assessments just were not able to be marked in that year due to the flood event. One of the other pieces I'll point out is as a district, we have historically committed to and had high participation rates. We are one of the highest participating districts at about 90%. So that gives us a really good picture. And so just to keep that in mind as we're doing comparisons, that not all districts are equal in terms of their participation. And as you look to some of our priority populations, that is reflected because we try to get as many students writing so that we can use this as a guide to where the system is at. Again, similar trend here for grade 7 FSA. Again, still high participation rate, but overall declining trend both provincially and locally. Again, looking to institute some approaches that help us change the trajectory. And then the last measure here is the grade 10 literacy based on the graduation assessment. And so our participation in the grade 10 literacy is about 88%, so again high. And we've had pretty stable results over the last 5 years in line with kind of what is being seen provincially. So one of the some of the pieces I'll highlight out of those three graphs. One of the key context pieces is the complexity within a classroom and the needs within a classroom. And so we do see kids with designation, so ministry designation, happening at a higher rate. And so that could be an indication of kids with identified learning needs and obviously the impact that might have on an assessment measure. You'll see that a lot of our data for our priority populations is masked. It is not big enough for them to publish. But again, I think as we kind of look at this, our participation again is still really high. And so as we look at some of that unmasked data that we can do, it gives us a picture of some of the trends that might be happening. So, for example, the literacy proficiency has declined in grade 4 to 7, dropping from 80% in the low 60s over the course of a 5-year period, but our grade 10s are holding steady at 68%, right? So that gives us some opportunity to kind of look at what's going well, what's not going well, right? So our strengths of high participation, an overall proficiency, so we can say that many of our kids are proficient, that we're intervening early and we're getting some good early results and improved alignment, but we need to watch for that declining trend that we're seeing here locally and provincially, and making sure that that we don't continue to see the increase between the all students in our priority population, so the gap that sometimes exists. And so that's just a real high-level assessment of the literacy areas as are presented in our FESL. Again, for numeracy, so looking at our grade 4, again, a slightly different trajectory. So you could look at year 1, 2020 to 21, up to the 24, 25, you could say that there's been a decrease, but if you look at that actual trend over the last couple of years, it is moving up, right? So if you looked at from the 22, 23 year, that you begin to see a change in that curve, right? And that's a positive sign. And we begin to see that similarly for grade 7. And so we begin to think about some of the things that we've been doing in the area of numeracy that have been brought to the board, and perhaps some of that is having an impact on the results that we're seeing at a school level. Grade 10 numeracy through the graduation numeracy assessment. Again, this one, as we've talked in the past, has had some complication, right, in terms of student understanding, and that has been at the provincial table. And it's this idea of numeracy versus math, who's responsible for, and we've certainly heard from students around some confusion during the assessment. And so we continue to work on that particular piece, and I think the results you see there where we are below the provincial point to an area for us to attend to with respect to that numeracy assessment. And so, again, I talked about some of the trends that overall over a 5-year period we're still lower, but that trajectory at grade 4 and 7 may be changing. And again, we need high participation in these assessments. They are a point-in-time measure, but an important measure for us to understand how the system is working. And so that remains a strength for us. Again, areas that we need to look at, we talked about that grade 10 piece, right? And so when we look at the assessment compared to report card marks or other assessment measures we have, we see a little bit of misalignment. So we know that we need to understand that concept of numeracy, and in particular with that assessment, because it doesn't necessarily align with some of what we're seeing with other assessment measures and report card assessments from teachers. The third or second area around human and social development, specifically looking at this feeling welcome and safe and connected piece. And And again, we know that when we look holistically at the students in our district, that this is an important part, and the Enhancing Student Learning Report recognizes that by having this as a requirement through the Student Learning Survey data. And so you'll see there that first graph of positive response rates for grade 4, 7, and 10 with respect to students feeling welcome. You can see a general increase for all students, and overall fairly positive results when it comes to feeling safe, welcome, and connected. Feeling welcome, that one. The next one around feeling safe, grades 4, 7, and 10. We don't have the ability to break up per grade, so that graph looks a little bit different. So it is across time, but it's really for all students in that area. And you'll see in terms of feeling safe, it's stayed relatively steady at the mid-70s in terms of the response rates from all students who've taken the survey, 4, 7, and 10. So this one around, and we've talked a lot about this idea of students feel that adults care about them at school. And so this is something we have looked at over time. I know we've had some conversations with respect to a number of presentations around how can we get this number up. And you'll see, again, with this one, we do have some declining trends with respect to, oh, one sec here. I'm looking at something different. There we go. I'll step back a bit. Belonging. So increases in belonging. And so, again, a positive result. So students appear to be having a stronger sense of belonging at school. And I think that's good information for us to consider and look at with respect to some of the things that we're doing to create engagement and connection at school. And again, a positive aspect for us. And my apologies, this one is about adult care. And so the results probably not as high as we would want in terms of do students feel that adults care about them. And it's not that the adults are not caring at school, but it's the perception of. And so we continue to investigate this particular piece, asking some questions. What we would see is we are above the provincial average in a lot of these areas when you look at this. But I would say that every adult in the system would want to see this get higher. And so we continue to look at this idea of care in schools. And so when you begin to look at some of the trends, we have stable results when it comes to feelings of welcome and safety overall. And, just being mindful of some of the gaps. So our Indigenous students or students with designations reporting lower belonging than peers, right? And so again, just for us to remain attuned to that. Again, strengths, while we would want that adult care to come up, we know that we have strong results in comparison to other districts. We know that we're seeing good early well-being, strong peer relationships, and then we just need to watch for over time declining well-being. So some of the results that we're seeing over time would indicate that some of our students are declining in their overall well-being. Graduation. And so want to look at a couple of measures here. As you know, we have high graduation rates, and this one is achievement with a dogwood within 5 years, and this is inclusive of adult dogwood. So some different requirements with adult dogwood, but when you see the results, we remain steady at about 89%, with our Indigenous students at 67%. And our students with designation about 64. So we do have a gap, continue to have a gap in between all students in some of our priority populations. When we look at and factor out the adult dogwood and just look specifically at dogwood achieved within 5 years, again, we stay pretty stable at about 87%. And again, similar for our Indigenous and students with designation. Again, to be really proud of that high rate of graduation within 5 years. transition. So looking at kids who move from grade 10 to 11 in this particular side, and you can see about 97%. So the majority of our kids move from grade 10 to 11 in that grade-to-grade transition, and it remains relatively high for both our Indigenous and students in care and students with designation. When you begin to look at grade-to-grade for 11 to 12, a little bit different story. So at about 90% for all students, but you'll see some results that drop for other groups. And so that's a point of analysis for us and to consider about why that might be happening, right? And so that's part of our work to begin to look at what might be resulting in some of those lower grade-to-grade transition rates for other groups. And there may be good reasons for that in terms of getting students to graduation. So in terms of trends, we really do see quite a stable overall 5-year completion rate in the 88 to 89%. And the overall 5-year completion rate for Indigenous students did decline from 73 to 67 over a period of time. And so again, strengths being high overall completion. We are seeing improvements with children in care, with students with designation, and the performance of our Indigenous on reserve. We are seeing better results. And so we just need to be mindful again of some of the gaps that might exist between different groups and some of the challenges that come with our children, youth, and care. The most vulnerable group in our system, and some of the complexities that come with that, and making sure that we don't lose sight of their needs within the system. The last area that I'll cover is under career development, and it's the life and career core competencies. And so specifically looking at post-secondary transitions. So the first one looking at the immediate transition. And so you'll see there again, I apologize for the size of font, but at about 55% overall for this 22-23 school year. And you can see again, the lower rates of transition immediately from our Indigenous and students with designation. When we look at post-secondary transitions within a 3-year period, it gets a little bit, stays the same overall, but it does have some marginal increases throughout the trend or pattern. But I think it is one of the things that we need to look at is how we support students as they move out of our system into post-sec, whatever that might look like for them, and again, helps drive some of the conversations that we're having as a district. And so this idea that we are seeing a trend of post-secondary transitions declining overall, with the immediate rates dropping a couple of percentage points, and then the 3-year dropping by about 8% from 2018-19 to 2022-23. And so we need to pay attention to this area, and we've done lots of work in connection with local universities, the UFE, and continue to have some conversations around how we improve the transition and exposure to different kinds of programming for students and different career paths, because we want to address the declining 3-year transition, right? And so that will be continued work for us in the years to come that we'll report on as a part of this Enhancing Student Learning report. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Okay, so that was a lot for the brain to absorb, but Trustee White.
Yeah, thank you, Superintendent Ning. There's obviously a lot of very worrying stats on here. Anybody reading this should be concerned. There's not enough time to get into it all, but I think the one thing that really stands out to me is the gap between the general population and our Indigenous students. And, this is obviously not just an Abbotsford issue, this is a province-wide issue. Something that, something isn't working. We've been saying this for years. I've been saying it for 3 years that I've been here. So I guess my question would be, I'm just, for me as a trustee, I'm going back 3 years. Is there anything we're doing or planning to do differently, specifically with our Indigenous students this next year or the next couple of years that is different than, say, like 3 years ago? Like,
Right.
what ways are we pivoting? What ways are we trying new things? Because there's a gap here, and in some places, we're actually behind the provincial average even, and quite a bit behind. So I guess, yeah, I'd like your response to that. Thank you.
Sure. I would say it is an area that we need to attend to. It's important because we want to make sure there's no gap. So I would agree with you on that. What I would point to are there things that we are doing in our system right now that are making a difference. So we brought to you things like the spring break camp, a summer camp, where we're targeting and we're pulling Indigenous students in to make sure that they're getting the courses that they need or the support they need to graduate. I presented to the board last year as a part of some of the work that we're doing in Indigenous that we've reduced the need. So for example, we actually didn't have to do a spring break camp last year because we were able to, with the goals and the work that was happening with our Indigenous department and the collaboration that was happening within our schools, we were able to catch and support students who were Indigenous in a much better way. The example I would point out to you is Yale Secondary. Yale Secondary had 100% or close to 100% graduation rate for Indigenous students. And that, I believe, is the second year in a row, right? And that goes to the commitment to our enhancement agreement, right? And some of our pieces there around connection. And so you heard earlier today from the student, I forget his name now. Lincoln. The importance of connection and belonging, right? And that is exhibited through some of the work that we've committed to. So whether that is the drumming project that happens in that transition from 6 to 7, whether that is 5 to 6, whether it's the paddle project that Trustee Rupi Kandarajwan mentioned in terms of the transition into grade 9, or whether it's the blanketing ceremony and the role model piece that we do in our high schools. What that's doing is creating higher levels of belonging and engagement. We have a strong relationship, when we talk specifically with Samath, First Nation, and Mathaqui around developing approaches and supports and work hand in hand with them, and that translates into some of the work that we do with our off-reserve population as well. So we have a lot of work to do, but what I would say is we're moving in the right direction to close the gap, and we have stories of success within our district that point to continued work in the areas around connection to culture, a focus on academic support, right, and the commitment as a community to tackle this work together, right? And that's really exemplified in our enhancement agreement.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, maybe. You mentioned drumming, paddling, blanket ceremony. That doesn't seem to be new, but maybe I'm wrong. Like, is that something we've recently started to do, or is that something?
So I don't think you throw out the baby with the bathwater, and I think I'll use the paddle project because I've been the closest to that one. That has iterated and evolved over time, and there's offshoots to that. There's the conversations that happen, right, in terms of our connection to key elders and the ability to bring them in. To have administrators go on those trips and understand and be a part of those experiences, trustees as a part of those experiences, that it's driven some conversation, so at middle, for example, a group of committed administrators and teachers that come together to talk about some of these pieces. Now that's bled into elementary, and they've moved that work. And so I think by doing those kinds of things where we're telling the system what's important, right? We want all kids to feel like they belong at school. When you belong, you're engaged. It leads to better opportunity to be successful at school. In terms of brand new things, I think we have to be careful, right, about the number of new things we throw in the classroom. But there's some good things that we do, that we talk about, that we think about continuous improvement. And the paddle project, for me, if you looked at it in year 1 compared to year 5, completely different. In design, in outcome, and involvement. And I think those kinds of things have shown, and I would say the same thing about spring break camp, right? To the point where we actually didn't serve the same purpose because the need wasn't there, right? And because we were catching students at a much earlier rate with respect to academic success.
So is there data to, I mean, I'm just looking at the sense of belonging, so all these things seem to point to that. So we're 10 points behind almost in the provincial average in a sense of belonging. We've been behind the provincial average for 5 years. I mean, I guess a critic could say, one might say, like, the paddle project and the blanketing ceremonies, they're not actually working. They're not leading
No,
to
I
better
would-
belonging, and they're not leading to better
I
outcomes.
would disagree, and I would point, Trustee White, remember at the beginning, I said participation rate here is quite high. And so you have to be careful when you're comparing to district. We have high participation rate in all of our assessments and our surveys, and so we get accurate data. I don't know that you could say that for every district, right? And that's something the ministry has talked about, right? But we're committed to here in this district, because we want a realistic picture of where our students are at academically, socially. And so when we look at year to year, and again, what we've talked about is, so there's a number, but there's a story behind that number. You heard from a student today around the things that we're doing and the impact that it's having. And I would tell you that there are other students out there where they would have a very similar story, right? Not to say that we don't change or try, and we continue to, because that's part of the work that we do in support of the board's plan, but we will continue to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Kendall-Rajwan.
Thank you, Chair Wilson. Just to comment to Trustee White's point, I get what you're saying, because when we see numbers, it's hard to see if there's been a change. But I do know in the last 3 years, attending Indigenous convocations, the numbers have increased. Being to a couple events, the blanket ceremonies, the conversations that are happening at the table, like the student today, I think this is the first time I've seen a student so young speak from the Indigenous community of his culture and his community. So it's so hard to look at numbers, because the numbers didn't tell the whole story. And I think the other question we used to always ask is, like, what is the actual question that's being asked? Like, what is the actual question? Is the child feeling safe, welcomed, or supported? So it's hard to decipher what is that question actually asking compared to what we're seeing in public and today. The other thing I wanted to acknowledge is that I appreciate that you did mention about the gap of well-being, the disconnect of well-being, because it's related to mental health, and we're not putting it in the back burner, we're putting it in the forefront. We're like, no, we need to talk about this. We know the numbers are not great, but we're not leaving it. We're still doing things, and it takes time to build trust, relationships, and respect. So I think it's in the right direction, but the numbers show it differently, because I think the questions they're not related to it.
Okay. Thank you,
you.
Trustee Kendall-Rajwan. Trustee Roach.
Yeah, thank you for that good presentation, Nathan. Couple of questions and requests and a few comments. My first question was with regard to post-secondary transition. If a student goes on into the trades, let's say an apprenticeship, is
Right.
that captured under? That's not post-secondary, or is it?
I think it depends.
Okay.
I'd have to check and get back to you on that to see,
Okay.
depending on the program and which institution, is that counted towards? I want to say for the majority, yes, but let me double check and give you a more definitive
Okay,
answer.
I'd love to see a little data on that, because the trades are getting more complex these days, and there's lots of opportunity in trades too. So I think our goal should be that kids, move on to something that, makes the most out of who they are, right? And if that's in the trades, then that's great, right? They should just be the best they can be. So it would be great to just learn a little more on that. My second question is on the numeracy exam. I think in the summer, somebody showed me a couple of example questions, because I remember us talking about how it's not really representative. It's like a language exam, whatever. But I read it and I thought, well, this is exactly the kind of exam we should have, because it's a word problem. It's real life, Lucy takes a train to wherever, and, so can we get a copy of the numeracy exam? Just so we can see what the questions are like?
I just want to comment, before we move too far along your request, I just want to make sure each time there's a request that the table agrees to the
yes.
request. So the first one was on data in the trades. Is there an appetite from the table for that? If you, since it's a raw poll, just if you would like it, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay. All right, so that's a yes from the table. You're requesting.
Thank you for catching that.
Yep, and
if-
then when you finish with this one, I'll ask again.
Sure, yeah, if we'd be interested in seeing sort of example questions or an example numeracy exam test, just so we understand what those questions look like, so that when results are either good or not good, we can sort of understand what does the exam look like.
Just again, I will pull the table for those who are willing to, or would like to, not willing, would like to see those questions. 1, 2, 3-ish, 3 and an ish.
Maybe we should
And
ask,
ish?
is it a lot of work, or is it easy to get one?
That, usually they keep them in lock and key as assessments, so.
Which is why I'm asking the question.
I don't know if, I did sit at the table for AGPA 3. There's a variety of examples. They don't make them readily for obvious reasons.
Or
But
example questions, or?
you're not wrong in terms of, it's the distinction between math and numeracy. And the feedback we've had from students has been exactly what you've said. Well, they're asking me, questions that seem abstract because they've got to work through and solve a problem and apply. And so that's part of the work that the system is currently contemplating around how do we get better understanding around what the purpose of the numeracy assessment is, because it's not necessarily a math assessment. And so there's an instructional mismatch sometimes that was been noted provincially. So I know there's ongoing work. I can see if there's an example, but I'm not sure that they're not out floating around.
So what I would suggest, because the board's not in full agreement, is that the superintendent check to see if there is anything, and if he can, what it is, and then come back to us and let us know.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, carry on.
And then my third thought, and I'm going to sound like a broken record here a little bit, the literacy is really slipping, right? And I'm heartened, at least, that this board has taken it as a big priority in early literacy to move the needle a little bit. And I think there's some external factors and some internal factors which we can control. It's harder to control external factors. So things like screens at home are obviously working against us, right? Busy households are working against us, right? Where parents can't read with children as often and things like that. But I think something like the proficiency scale is something we are in control of. And I guess I'm wondering if we could give teachers maybe guidance, or somehow I feel like if parents were more like acutely aware if their child is having trouble reading at a young age, sort of make sure that parent knows it, like with no question, no fluff from a teacher, trying to be kind or whatever, but like try and be like brutally honest and say your child needs to read more books, like as opposed to your child could benefit from more reading at night, like what does that mean? Every child could benefit from more reading at night, right? So food for thought, just
Trustee Rouch, I just remind you that this discussion has happened at the table in the past year, so it would be one that would have to.
yeah, this
to wait.
isn't a motion.
I know,
This
but
is-
it's also the discussions, it's also being brought forward for the proficiency scale, and we have a reporting order that we have to follow.
Yes, and I'm not saying I know we can't change the proficiency scale, but we could certainly encourage teachers to communicate as best they can with parents, even if the parent doesn't show up at the parent-teacher interview, because we all know the ones who show up are usually the ones, that's what the teachers tell me, the ones who show up are not always the ones who need to show up, right? So somehow for teachers to reach out to parents who really need to know their child needs to read more.
And just a reminder, there was a failed motion in that regard, so
Thank
I
you,
just.
Shirley, I'm aware of that.
Trustee Rouch, I'm
Well,
clarifying.
I'm aware of it. You said it the second
Yes.
time. Thank you. And I have a fourth.
It's a warning, Trustee Rouch.
A warning.
Yes, a warning. Decorum, please. Carry on.
I'll carry on. My fourth request is that I know behind these numbers, there are layers of data which the ministry collects, which I think could be very helpful for us to understand. So, for example, on the literacy and numeracy, there must be some districts that are doing better than us and some districts that are doing worse than us. So I wonder if it would be useful, curious to know if it would be useful at all to dive deeper into that data and look at specifically, who are the top 3-4 districts in literacy or numeracy, and then maybe engage, for a lunch or something, and just say, what are they doing differently than we are, or maybe they're not. So that would be a request, but again, it would need to be supported by others.
Well, in this case, I think some history is relevant.
So we are engaged with districts. There are a number of networks and forums that gather, whether it be principals or school leaders or district leaders together along with teachers to engage in conversations around best practice. Recently, the ministry has put in place a literacy screener, and there's been a lot of conversation amongst districts and within districts about best ways to implement. And you heard Vice Principal Beatty talk about Acadians as a part of the ongoing provincial work around implementation of literacy screeners, and that's happened in a number of different forums. One of our provincial outreach programs, Poppy, is taking the lead with that, and they've been facilitating lots of cross-district conversations. And so absolutely understand the importance of networking outside the district to look at ways to be innovative. This is the number one most important area for our district in terms of literacy and literacy rates. We continue to work really hard. Our curriculum department is devoted considerable time. You saw the literacy framework that they've developed to provide guidance to schools, and that has been done not in isolation, but in conversation and looking at what was out there by districts that we know have had lots of success in different areas. And so it is an important lever that we'll continue to pull in terms of talking to other school districts, looking at what they're doing and creating, again, this idea of communities, right? Communities of practice where we talk about best literacy practices so that we're not trying to do this in isolation, because we're all grappling with this very similar trend of declining literacy levels.
So what I will
I
ask,
just would like to say thank you.
just
That
wanted to
answers
follow up
my,
on your request.
yeah, well, I
Okay.
just want to say thank you for that explanation. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear, so sounds like you're working in that regard already. Thank you.
I am going to ask the table if they would like to follow up with, or have the superintendent follow up with some examples of what has been going on with that collaboration in the Fraser Valley or other districts. Is anybody interested in that? One?
Be interested in outliers, like if there's an outlier school district that's like, whoa, way above, I know maybe there isn't, but if there is.
Your microphone is not on,
Oh, yeah,
Trustee White, and I haven't recognized you yet.
Sorry. Sitting's the new smoking, so, you got to stand. No, sorry, I was just saying, I'd be interested in hearing if there was any outliers, if there's any districts that were way above the provincial average. That's what I'd be interested in.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? You've got a question. I didn't hear any overwhelming support for that, so, but thank you. No, they didn't. Yeah, it's already answered. Okay, thank you. Trustee Kandaraj, one.
Thank you, Chair Wilson. I was just thinking what Trustee White and Trustee Retch are talking about, and sometimes it's asking the right question. So now I'm curious, can we request to see samples of the questions of how children feel safe, sense of belonging and welcoming? Because maybe that's the other question we need to ask. Like if we cannot know what that question is.
So the survey results actually show they'll give the sentence, so I can certainly bring that. Yeah, that's the question. Yeah, it's right on the,
Trustee Kandaraj, one. Your microphone's.
Sorry, yeah, I think it was helpful if we had those questions back with us so we can have that as a reminder of what the questions are being asked for grade 4, 7, and 10. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would the table be amenable to that? It is a request of staff time.
I guess I don't
Trustee
feel
Roach.
like we need it because it's in the survey, right? Like, I think we've seen them in the past, but it'd be easy to pull up, right?
Thank you. Anyone else?
I don't need it, though.
Trustee Rai?
I would be okay with getting it, but I would like to know the future questions when these surveys are happening. The surveys that are passed, they're passed. So there's that, and I'm sure there's better minds than us who are making these surveys, who's doing a lot of research instead of who are make these surveys up. So I don't know whether we can change any of those surveys, because I'm sure professionals, better minds are doing it than us. So I can see it, but I don't see the point.
Okay. Can you, I'll recognize you when you turn on your mic.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank
Trustee
you.
Kandaraj, one.
The only reason I'm asking Trustee Uri is because maybe we're missing the disconnect. If we're looking at that question again, just reminding us what is the question for grade 4 and 7 and 10, it's just a reminder, like, we saw those questions a long time ago, but when we see these stats, if it's easy to pull up, just to have those questions here when we're looking at the stats, because instead of us looking for all those old questions, it's hard to find them. That's what I'm just thinking, if it's an easy way for us to see those questions.
Sure,
Yeah.
like if we need to see the intent of the question. yes,
Yeah,
we-
just
we
the
can have a
intent
look
of it
at
is a reminder.
Yeah, it's a
Thank you.
reminder.
Are there other people, Trustee Peterson?
I'm actually reminded about discussions we had about this survey and when it asks the questions, you feel safe at school. And if you say no, we're not sure what that means. Now, we should be concerned when anybody doesn't feel safe at school, absolutely. But what we don't get to do is dig deeper into the reason why the person might have said no. Maybe it's walking to school, or maybe it's like riding on a bus, or maybe there is a significant issue that's directly related to the school. And so while we get a general sense of what it might mean, it'd be nice to be able to break that down further. And I know we've talked about that. I'm hoping that when schools see these results, that in fact they explore them even further and find out what is it that you don't feel safe about.
Thank you. Superintendent Ning?
So the student learning survey is one set of data, right? And there are some questions around the way in which the questions are worded, and I know that having sat around the table, that has come up. We do the MDI at grade 5, and we do the YDI, again, in grade 11. And those are comparable, much more defined surveys that actually provide us with a wealth of information in similar areas with respect to student well-being. And so we look at the student learning survey, but we actually look to the MDI and the YDI to give us a little bit more depth and understanding why students don't feel safe or connected or, civically engaged or what have you. The YDI, because we've done some work with the researchers, incorporate some aspects of extracurricular, right? And just gives us more information. The ministry requires us to report on the student learning survey for the purposes of the framework for enhancing student learning. But what we actually get more detail and actionable things from is the MDI at 5 and 8, and the YDI at 11, grade 11.
Okay. So, Trustee Kendall-Rajwan, is that still your request, or are you suffice to wait for the future?
We can wait for the future, and I just feel like we had a conversation about this before, and we talked about when the surveys are done, there's no way to prove if it was better for them 3 years later, right? I think that was the conversation that we've had before. So yeah, I don't mind to table it, but I still want to have a further discussion of what does that look like, if we can somehow have that discussion. I'm not trying to create more work, but I think we need to dig deeper a little bit about this.
And that is something that comes forward on a separate agenda,
Yeah.
so we'll make note of it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just because it does come forward already. Any other questions regarding FESL, Framework for Enhancing Student Learning? Sorry about the acronyms.
I'm going to move acceptance of this report.
It is an action item. Thank you, Trustee Peterson. Seconder, Trustee Roach.